Number 1.
On February 6, 2010, McLennigan Soto attended a party at 14th Street and 7th Avenue, about 12 doors down from her own residence in the New York City borough of Brooklyn. She apparently got into an argument with the host and left the party angrily at 2 a.m. She left her driver's license, bank card, cellular phone, 2 packs of cigarettes and $300 in cash in her apartment, but her 2 laptop computers and her handwritten journals were gone, as were the clothes she had been wearing that night. Her bank accounts and email account have not been used since February 6. A local bodega owner stated he saw McLennigan Soto at 7 p.m. on February 7, over a day after the party. The bodega owner stated McLennigan Soto came into the establishment to tell him goodbye. She was crying and upset and said she was going to Long Island and he wouldn't be seeing her anymore. McLennigan Soto's brother lives on Long Island, but he hasn't heard from her, and her family can't think of anyone else she knows who lives there. It's extremely uncharacteristic of McLennigan Soto to leave without warning. Her family stated she had gotten a new job at a medical marketing firm and was satisfied with her life at the time of her disappearance, although she was mourning the recent deaths of a friend, her father and 2 aunts. She had separated from her husband, but he stated they were friendly with each other and remained in close contact. McLennigan Soto had been dating Richard Eric Sosa, the man who hosted the party she attended the night of her disappearance. They had been arguing and neighbors heard a loud fight at his home just before she disappeared. Authorities have not named Sosa as a suspect in McLennigan Soto's case, although they have interviewed him several times and asked him to take a polygraph. Little evidence is available as to McLennigan Soto's fate. Her case remains unsolved.
Number 2.
Tammie missed her morning bus to Saratoga Springs Junior High School on West Circular Street in Saratoga Springs, New York on April 19, 1986. She told her sister she would hitchhike to school instead. Tammie never arrived for her 7th grade classes that day and has not been heard from again. Around the time of her disappearance, she told friends she was planning on running away to Florida. Her mother didn't believe she would have run away because she left all her clothes behind and because on the day of her disappearance, she was wearing her most worn-out pair of pants and a pair of uncomfortable boots that gave her blisters. Tammie resided on Deerlip Place in the Geyser Crest neighborhood of Saratoga Springs at the time of her disappearance. Her mother reported her missing 2 days after she was last seen. There were several possible sightings of her over the years in Florida, Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont and California, but none of these were confirmed. In February 2011, authorities announced they believed Tammie had been murdered and they had identified her probable killer as Arthur Mason Slaybaugh. Slaybaugh was a corrections officer at Mount McGregor Correctional Facility in Winton, New York. He died of a heart attack in 2001 at the age of 41. He would have been in his mid-20s when Tammie disappeared. She knew and admired him and thought of him as a mentor. Authorities had long considered Slaybaugh a person of interest in Tammie's case, but they had little evidence against him until after his death, when witnesses came forward with information they had been too afraid to disclose before. Tammie's parents now live in Casiuna, New York, but her 5 siblings still live in the neighborhood she disappeared from. Authorities still hope to recover her body. Foul play is suspected in her case due to the circumstances involved.
Number 3.
McLaughlin took a leave of absence from the College of Visual and Performing Arts at Syracuse University in Syracuse, New York, in mid-October 1975. He was a junior at the time. He had a satisfactory academic record and planned to re-enroll for the spring semester the following January. He was an art major who studied painting, photography and ceramics, but he planned to change his major to a more general liberal arts curriculum. His 5 roommates last saw him at 1 p.m. on October 23, 1975, when he asked for a ride to the 100 block of Marshall Street to get something to eat. McLaughlin's family, who lives in Manhasset on Long Island, was not notified of his disappearance until November 3 because McLaughlin occasionally took out-of-town trips without telling anyone beforehand, and he had been planning a trip to England in December to visit his girlfriend who was studying abroad. He had obtained a passport and purchased a plane ticket in preparation for the trip. It is uncharacteristic of McLaughlin to be out of contact with his loved ones for more than a few days, however, and all of his personal belongings, including his Jeep and $250 in cash, were left behind. His checkbook was missing, but there has been no activity on the account since October 1975. McLaughlin resided in the 100 block of Harvard Place in Syracuse, off Westcott Street, when he vanished. He may have been seen in the restaurant of a Holiday Inn in Kingston, Ontario 3 days after his disappearance, but this has not been confirmed. McLaughlin has never been heard from again. He may have been carrying at least $3,000 in cash at the time of his disappearance. His father gave him $3,300 to buy a car, and he disappeared after making a $300 down payment on a 1963 Mercedes at a dealership in Syracuse. Some reports place the amount of cash he had on him at as high as $7,000, and he may have been carrying a small personal check as well. McLaughlin had a reputation for carrying large sums of money at the time he disappeared. Larry F. Brown was apprehended on drug charges and returned to New York in 1989. Authorities received information that suggested Brown knew McLaughlin's whereabouts. Prior to his disappearance, McLaughlin had occasionally supplied marijuana at campus parties and was reportedly bringing in a large amount of drugs from New York City to Syracuse in October 1975. There were unconfirmed reports that he knew Brown through drug sales. Brown requested to take a polygraph exam and he passed the test. Investigators do not believe he was involved in McLaughlin's disappearance. While there is no evidence of foul play in McLaughlin's case, authorities consider his disappearance highly unusual because he does not have a history of leaving for long periods and because he left all his possessions behind. They theorized that he may have committed suicide or developed amnesia, but there is no evidence to support this or any other hypothesis. Later, investigators came to believe he had probably been murdered in a robbery and/or as a result of his involvement in drugs, but they have not identified any suspects. McLaughlin's case remains unsolved. His family held a memorial service for him a few years after his disappearance.
Number 4.
Launa was last heard from on February 23, 1983, when she called her grandmother. She said she was calling from a payphone at James and Townsend Streets in Syracuse, New York. Launa said she was with some friends and would be home later. She has never been heard from again. She wasn't carrying her makeup, a toothbrush or any money with her at the time of her disappearance. She only had a grocery bag full of clothes. Launa formerly lived in Fremont, New York with her mother and attended East Syracuse Minoa schools. Prior to her disappearance, she dropped out of school and went to live with her grandmother. She is described as having a very trusting nature. Launa frequented the Eastwood neighborhood of Syracuse. She frequently ran away from home and was arrested for prostitution at least once, several months before she went missing. The day after her disappearance, she was scheduled to appear in court on the prostitution charge. Launa's grandmother stated she did not believe Launa was involved with drugs or alcohol in 1983. Prior to her disappearance, Launa had told her grandmother that if she ever went a month or more without contact, her grandmother should tell the police about one of the men she associated with. Launa wasn't reported missing until March 16, 3 weeks after her disappearance. Her case remains unsolved.
Number 5.
Mixon was last seen in the evening hours of May 4, 1998, at his residence in the vicinity of Bryson Street and Memorial Drive in Buffalo, New York. He had left a message on his mother's answering machine asking her to page him. When she tried to do so, the message on his pager said he had gone turkey hunting and people should contact his roommate, Vladimir L. Sokolov. When Mixon's mother spoke to Sokolov, Sokolov said he would tell her what happened in a couple of weeks and that he was nervous and planned to leave the country. Mixon has never been heard from again. His mother reported him missing on May 11. He left behind a young son. Mixon had deeded his apartment to Sokolov in order to keep his ex-wife from getting it. The day after Mixon's disappearance, Sokolov put all of his roommate's belongings on the street. He also started wearing Mixon's clothes. Mixon's mother said her son was involved in drug trafficking and she believed he and Sokolov had been involved in a drug deal that went wrong. Sokolov returned to his native Bulgaria in 1999 after learning he was a suspect in Mixon's disappearance. He had allegedly bragged about killing Mixon, and his own ex-girlfriend claims to have seen Mixon's dismembered body inside the apartment. Mixon and Sokolov's apartment was searched 2 weeks after Mixon disappeared, and police could find no evidence of a crime scene there, but it had been cleaned and painted. In 2000, Sokolov was charged with second-degree murder in Mixon's case and extradited to the United States. This is believed to have been the first time since the end of the Cold War that Bulgaria allowed one of their citizens to be extradited to the West. The murder trial was held in 2002. Prosecutors argued that Sokolov killed Mixon in anger and then dismembered or burned the body, which was never found. Defense witnesses at the trial implied Mixon was alive and had left of his own accord. One witness said Mixon told him he was wanted by the FBI and owed money to Jamaican drug suppliers and planned to flee as a result. The witness said Mixon showed him $10,000 worth of survival gear and food it had accumulated for this purpose. Sokolov was acquitted of Mixon's murder in March 2002. Mixon's disappearance remains unsolved. Foul play is suspected due to the circumstances involved.
Number 6.
Montiero was last seen at her apartment in the 1800 block of 7th Avenue in the New York City borough of Manhattan on April 2, 2000. At approximately 7 p.m. the night before, she was speaking on the phone with a friend when her live-in boyfriend, Heriberto Eddie Palacio, was overheard screaming and swearing at her in the background. Montiero has never been heard from again. Her boyfriend said he last saw her on April 2 when she went to a hairdresser's appointment, but the police found out she never visited a hairdresser that day. In fact, no one besides Palacio claims to have seen Montiero after April 1. He never reported her missing, her brother did on April 7. Palacio said he didn't approach the police about her disappearance because she had an order of protection against him and he feared he would be arrested. Montiero left her clothes and beeper behind in her apartment. On April 2, the same day Palacio claims he last saw her, Montiero's wallet, identification and credit cards were found at a payphone at a mobile gas station next to the Grand Central Parkway near LaGuardia Airport, opposite the Delta Airlines terminal. The gas station attendant who found the wallet didn't report his discovery for several days because he assumed the owner would return for it. Authorities believe whoever placed the wallet at the gas station did so in an attempt to mislead the investigation. Palacio was arrested on an unrelated weapons charge in late April 2000, and authorities questioned him regarding Montiero's disappearance. He had a violent past. At age 14, he and an accomplice beat a man to death. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter and served 2 years in prison. In 1999, he was charged with attacking a female tenant in his apartment building, where he was superintendent. The outcome of that case is unknown. Montiero's relationship with Palacio had always been troubled. She reportedly loved Palacio deeply, but in the 2 years that they were together, she filed 11 domestic violence complaints against him, and he filed 4 such complaints against her. She repeatedly bailed him out of jail after his arrests. They have a daughter together, who was a year old when Montiero vanished. Montiero worked as an accounting clerk at the time of her disappearance and was studying accounting at Manhattan Community College. Her case remains unsolved and foul play is suspected.
Number 7.
Justina was last seen in New York City borough of Brooklyn sometime in November 1995. She lived in an apartment on Halsey Street in the Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood at the time and attended public school 1. She was frequently absent, and one of her relatives reported her truancy to the Bureau of Child Welfare, BCW, and the agency opened a file for Justina. The caseworker couldn't find any evidence of abuse, however. After Justina had gone 3 months without attending school even once, the school principal asked Justina's mother, Denise Solero, for an explanation. She claimed they were moving to another neighborhood in Brooklyn and withdrew her PS1 in November 1995. She'd said she would transfer Justina to PS93. The family did in fact move out of Justina's previous school district, but the child was never re-enrolled in school. Solero told the neighbors she had sent Justina to go live with her father out of town, but this wasn't true either. The BCW closed her file in February 1996 without realizing no one had seen her in months. In February 1997, a friend of the family went to police and said Justina had been killed. Solero's live-in boyfriend, Luis Santiago, was later charged in her death. Solero pleaded guilty to hindering prosecution and agreed to testify against Santiago. In return, she was sentenced to probation instead of a prison term. Solero claimed Santiago had been physically and sexually abusing Justina for years and that he also beat her. She was living in a shelter for battered women when Justina was reported missing. She depicted herself as a terrorized victim of Santiago's abuse and said she was too frightened to protect her daughter from harm. According to her, Solero and Santiago, Justina died on December 31, 1995. Santiago made a videotaped confession to causing Justina's death, saying he had unintentionally killed the girl by beating her with his fists and a metal pole. He stated he was attacking Solero and the child got in the way. Solero disputed Santiago's version of events, however. She said he had become enraged when Justina refused to take a bath. Over the course of about 2 hours, Santiago tried to drown her in the bathtub, punched her in the face, threw her against a wall, and then tried to suffocate her with a pillow. Justina finally died after Santiago wrapped duct tape around her nose and mouth while Solero held her hands. At his December 1997 trial, Santiago was acquitted of murder but convicted of second-degree manslaughter and evidence tampering. The manslaughter conviction indicated the jury believed his version of events rather than Solero's. He was sentenced to the maximum term of 6 to 19 years in prison for manslaughter, as well as 1 1/3 years for evidence tampering. A murder conviction would have carried a 25-year term. Solero pleaded guilty to hindering prosecution and was given a 5-year probationary term for her role in her daughter's murder. Her probation requirements were stringent. Among other rules, she was forbidden to have any contact with her other children without approval by both child welfare officials and the probation office, and she had to notify her probation officer if she became pregnant again. Many people criticized the deal as being too lenient, but the prosecution said that without Justina's body, Solero's eyewitness testimony was crucial in the case against Santiago. They also stated it wasn't until they'd agreed to the deal that they learned just how complicit Solero had been in Justina's death. After her conviction, Solero reverted to her former married name. In 1999, she requested supervised visits with one of her daughters who lived with Solero's sister, but her application was denied. The presiding judge commended her for complying with her strict probation requirements, but denied her visitation request and said, "At this point, I see no basis to allow her to visit with any child, particularly her own child." Santiago and Solero said they wrapped Justina's body in a trash bag and dumped it in a vacant lot in the 400 block of St. Mark's Avenue in Brooklyn. Authorities searched the lot thoroughly but could find no evidence. They believe her remains were hauled away with the garbage when the lot was cleared. Her body has never been found, but foul play is suspected in her case due to the circumstances involved.